Hey guys, today we are going to discuss the chilling murders of Jack the Ripper in the East End of London in 1888. However, what I really want to focus on and get your mind thinking about is the media. It's no secret that media is not always the most reliable source of information. In 2017, we see a lot of sensationalized media coverage. In 1888, almost 130 years ago, sensationalized media existed and affected the public opinion on many events, including the murders of Jack the Ripper. Along with discussing the overall effect media had during 1888, I want to look specifically at the effect that media had on the image of the East End of London and how their sensationalism ultimately spread fear throughout the population of London. But before we talk about that, let's provide some background to these chilling murders. And trust me, they are chilling and heinous. Between August 31st and November 9th of 1888, 5 brutal murders of prostitutes took place, all but within an evil quarter mile. At the time that these murders occurred, the East End of London was a very scary and frightening place, which ultimately made these murders possible. Historian Paul Begg expresses that during the 1880s, the East End became the focus of a great many general anxieties about unemployment, overcrowding, slum dwellings, disease, and gross immorality. One newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, reported the East End of London as a place where assaults and scenes of violence became normal and frequent occurrences. Some of the street names in the East End even had nicknames such as Blood Alley, Frying Pan Alley, and Shovel Alley, further enforcing this sense of fear and danger. The street where Mary Kelly, the last confirmed Ripper victim, met her untimely death, penned the nickname Do As You Please Street. This is the East End that became the stage for Jack the Ripper and his murders. The canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper are Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. These murders occurred during what would later be called the Autumn of Terror, because these murders spanned from August of 1888 to November of that same year. All 5 of the victims were prostitutes in the East End of London, and almost all 5 of the murders had extensive mutilation, having their wombs taken out by Jack the Ripper. Gross, I know. Begg expressed that, quote, "One of the reasons why Jack the Ripper achieved such notoriety at the time is that he killed in the right place at the right time." This begs the question as to what caused the East End of London to be the right place. The population of London knew the East End as a dark and mysterious place filled with danger for many reasons. The area itself had a darkness that surrounded it, with a bad quality of lighting and twisting and winding roads that made it difficult to navigate through. Even the police themselves hesitated to enter into these streets. Another historian, Judith Walkowitz, in her discussion of the conditions of the East End and Whitechapel in particular, stated that, quote, "Whitechapel provided a stark and sensational backdrop for the Ripper murders, an immoral landscape of light and darkness, another region of illicit sex and crime, both exciting and dangerous." The immoral landscape that the East End presented to the population of London led to the sexual nature that surrounded the murders of Jack the Ripper. The 5 victims of Jack the Ripper partook in the profession of prostitution. Prostitution, for argument's sake, is the act or practice of engaging in sexual intercourse for money. The working class resided in the East End of London as a result of the increasing urbanization within the city center. The East End had once been a part of a thriving industrial rim, but being on the decline, it started to become a center for trouble. Along with the working class, a majority of homeless and unemployed people lived in the East End, becoming restless as conditions grew worse. For the most part, the rest of London left the East End alone and only paid attention to the East End occasionally, such as during the cholera outbreak in London, or whenever a murder case reached their ears. Historian Drew Gray states that the Victorian middle class shivered in their comfortable homes and held their noses lest they be infected by the pollutions to the east. Now, I have a news flash for you guys. The identity of Jack the Ripper still has not been 100% confirmed. Even 130 years later, we still cannot say for a fact who Jack the Ripper was. Now, there are tons of suspects. I would guess that there's probably approximately 20 suspects. And they have gone through so many different reasons as to why this person is Jack the Ripper and this person is Jack the Ripper. But at the end of the day, we still don't know who Jack the Ripper was. There are many theories surrounding the possible identity of Jack the Ripper. One of the first theories that came out after they kind of got rid of the idea that it could be gang violence, which was also an issue in the East End of London, was that it was a single killer, and due to the mutilation and everything that had occurred with the victims, they figured, maybe this person is a butcher. Just maybe. You know, with the way that they cut the body and all of that stuff, it would make sense that they would be a butcher. Kind of like the Butcher Tales, which is another murder that happened in around the same time frame. Then they kind of moved on to another theory. They had this person that they thought could be Jack the Ripper, and they called him Leather Apron. That was another theory. And then it quickly moved on to the whole Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, where they thought it was one person who had two personalities. So their theory was that Jack the Ripper was upper class and that they would come over to the East End of London, which a lot of upper class people did, and sort of live out his sexual desires and his, like, you know, not so great desires, and live the life that at his very core was what he wanted. And then the final theory was that that Jack the Ripper was a mad doctor. They came up with this theory due to the fact that the wombs were taken out of the woman's body. Up until this point, the womb and the uterus and all that stuff was kind of this weird organ, and they kind of, like, I mean, some people even thought that it moved around in the body, which obviously we know now that doesn't happen, but they thought, you know, hey, if they've got so much anatomical knowledge, maybe this person's a mad doctor. We still don't know who Jack the Ripper is. Even after 130 years, we have no idea. We have people that we think. They're still not 100% sure. Moving on from the specifics of the case and the background of all the murders and all that, let's get into how the media was involved. And ultimately, what role the media played, because they played a really big role. So once news broke out about the Ripper murders, newspapers all across London began to discuss the ways that the murderer had mutilated the bodies of the victims. This was a very popular thing that they did in all the articles that I read. They were very detailed in how the body was mutilated, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, at the time of these murders, London had over 30 newspapers in publication, and there's probably even more than 30, but I just didn't want to count that high. So they had over 30 newspapers who helped to get the news of these murders to the population of London. Even in Victorian London, stories about crime and social unrest appealed to readers regardless of gender, race, class, or religion, which that is still very true to this day. As Chibnall makes clear, stories about particularly brutal crimes have more than entertainment value because they foster generalized anxieties and fears of an impending breakdown of order. London already had these anxieties about the East End of London and the decline it had seen in urbanization. The media just fed on those anxieties when they were reporting on the Ripper murders, ensuring to discuss the state of the East End both physically and morally. Just a couple newspapers that were pretty big participators in the news distribution is the Pall Mall Gazette, the Manchester Guardian, the Times, the Daily Telegraph, and the Star. In 1880, journalism itself went through a period of change and altered the way they presented the news to the population. Journalism became the art of structuring the reality rather than recording it. Kind of sounds like what we do nowadays. Instead of focusing on the facts, newspapers across London began to sensationalize the news in order to make it more attractive for their readers. The murders of Jack the Ripper, while they are extremely brutal and contain extensive amounts of mutilation, did not contain anything noteworthy in the East End of London. Also, the murder of a prostitute in Whitechapel would not have stimulated that much public interest. It became the job of the newspapers to provoke interest in the people and stimulate the already existing anxieties of Victorian London about the East End. The main topic of anxiety that the media focused on dwelled on the safety, or lack thereof, of women in densely urbanized areas. Walkowitz discussed the influence the Ripper murders had on the aspect of safety and how the myth of male violence formed around it. The overall message of our article is that the city is a dangerous place for women when they transgress the narrow, and when I say narrow, I mean narrow boundaries of home and hearth and dare to enter public space. The media, in their presentations of the Ripper murders, often associated sex and violence together, enforcing this idea of male dominance and female passivity present in Victorian London. To middle-class readers, the newspapers presented the victims as economically desperate women who violated their womanhood for the price of a night's lodging and for whom the wages of sin were death, insinuating that prostitution became their ultimate demise, making them an unsympathetic object of pity. Now, I don't know about you, but that does not make women sound very good in this society. And they definitely were not seen as very good at all. Now, getting to the actual articles and how the media actually presented the murders. I read a lot of newspaper articles, but one in particular that I want to focus on is early on, and it happened not long after the first confirmed Jack the Ripper murder of Mary Ann Nichols. And in this article, you can really just see very clearly the demoralization of the victims and how they described the woman's status, as well as how they described the state of the murdered bodies. This article I found in the London Times, and at the beginning of the article, the newspaper is quick to determine that Mary Ann, like the two previous murders before and all the other ones after, belonged to the class called unfortunates, ultimately saying she was a prostitute. They further explain her economic status and claim that robbery could not have been a motive for the crime because she was so very poor. Another point of analysis to address is in the article they refrained from using Nichols or Mary Ann or any real indicator other than deceased. So they initially identified her, Mary Ann Nichols, and then any point after that, they referred to her as deceased. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this was something that was very common, but this does add an element of demoralization and almost dehumanization due to the failure to continue to use her name throughout the article. Yeah, she's dead, but she's still got a name, does she not? You can still use it. The article described Nichols' murdered body in clinical language, further developing this image of violence that is prevalent in sensation horror journalism. Historian Curtis provided a rough analysis as to why newspapers presented the information with such graphic imagery. And believe me when I say that the imagery is extremely graphic. I would not even try and say it in a video just because it's so graphic. He deducts that the journalistic and graphic images of the Ripper victims at the crime scene or in the morgue reinforce their utter lack of power and also their objectification by the male gaze. So Gray points out that, like Jack the Ripper himself, the East End is sort of this product of a meshing together of perceptions and stereotypes, and it becomes really difficult to actually identify what the real East End looked like from myth and representation. This idea kind of addresses the influence that media had on shaping the image of the East End, especially during the Ripper murders. Sure, no one had really good images of the East End prior to the murders. No one really wanted to have anything to do with it, so it's not like this is a foreign concept. But with the help of novelists, writers, journalists, reformers, all those people involved in writing about the East End, they really helped, I would say, shape the perception that we have of the East End into what we know it today as this dirty, dark, immoral place. While we don't know who actually committed these heinous crimes, we do know that it had a lasting effect on society. The Ripper murders definitely had a hand in the negative portrayal of the East End, which translated to modern day urbanization and the formation of this myth of male violence that I discussed earlier. And it also exposed this deep-seated sexual antagonism, which men often expressed towards women. The newspaper played a huge role in this. They aided in just fostering this anxiety that people had, and they did it all with sensationalism. Really, that's what it comes down to. Yeah, these murders were awful. And never would I ever say that, you know, you should downplay the murders at all. But they would take every little detail and make it into something so big and so huge and grandiose that it was impossible to not be afraid. And some even argue that with the media coverage, and a lot of this is true even today, once a serial killer sees kind of that they're getting really well known, their murders tend to get a lot worse. This is seen with the canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. Mary Ann Nichols, she wasn't in too bad shape. Like, yeah, she was, like, don't get me wrong, she wasn't in the great shape. She was dead, she was mutilated, but when you compare the body of Mary Ann Nichols to the body of Mary Kelly, the mutilation that occurred in her body, like, I read newspaper articles that people, like, they walked into the room that it occurred in and they could not believe the sight that they were seeing. I couldn't even, like, put a picture. I wouldn't even put a picture up for you guys because it was just bad. So in conclusion, be careful with what you're reading in the media. Be very careful. And we see it today. We see it today in a lot of things. But especially in these murders, the media sensationalized the murders immensely. Further developed this sense of fear and danger that we still see today in urban settings. It's very typical in society for a woman to feel unsafe in an urban setting, and the media coverage during these murders definitely helped to reinforce that. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but I hope you guys enjoyed just learning a little bit more about Jack the Ripper and what role the media really had in all of this, because media plays a huge role in societies today, like a huge role. Be careful what you're looking at as far as media is concerned, and be sure to check your facts.